up to the microphone. Declaration of conflicts of interest disqualifications, seeing none. Let's hop into the engineering fee study workshop. Director Pitcock.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So
Stop me and ask me any questions for anything that you need more information on. So I just want to talk about our agenda for tonight. We're going to talk about user fee principles and guidance, basically the principles and guidance that we at NBS use to develop our fee studies with cities like Turlock. We're going to discuss the key issues framing the fee study that were addressed and are being addressed by the fee study, the costing methodology and approach that was taken to come up with the hourly rate and ultimately the full cost of service calculations that you see before you. Some policy setting considerations to present to you at a high level of what I've seen in other jurisdictions as you go through your process of determining policy setting for your city. And finally, some best management practices that I've also seen in jurisdictions across the state that help cities to continue to recover their costs effectively and efficiently. At a high level, the user fee study, what we did was define full cost recovery potential of individually based fees. So what you see before you in the handout that Mike presented is the current fee structure or fee schedule for the engineering division that has been reworked and reformatted in the fee structure. And that what that means is fees have been added, fees have been deleted, fees may have been restructured to better suit or fit what the division does and how, and specifically this staff, it was very important to make sure that the fees were set in a way that was more amicable or better for your customers. So some of the fees, you'll see some significant changes in the structure, while other fees you will not. So the two types of fees that you see on that list that were addressed are your user fees. These are charges imposed for a service provided or required due to the request or action of an individual or entity. And then you have your regulatory fees, which are those fees that the city can charges can be imposed to recover costs associated with the city's power to govern certain activities. These are the guidance, propositions, and government code that guide the user fee study methodology and ultimately how we conduct the studies that we do. The primary one is Proposition 26, and it talks about how regulatory permits are exempt. However, it still limits local government's reasonable costs. Then you have your government code, subsection 66014A, and Proposition 218. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of all the legalities of what this say. The primary information or piece of information you should take away from this slide is that ultimately what the state of California requires is that there is an estimated reasonable cost that is associated with each fee. Those are the terms in the government code. That is not slang that I am using. And that there is not a specific methodology prescribed to determine that estimated reasonable cost. So these are the key issues that frame the study that we are presenting to you today for consideration. First and foremost is a defensible methodology. The methodology that we used, which I will walk you through shortly, NBS has been doing for about 20 years. It is, as well as our competitors, this methodology in a general sense has been accepted through the state of California and has held up to criticism, even court cases in the past, to make sure that this methodology is acceptable. And up to this point, this methodology tends to be the most predominant methodology used in calculating user fees. Then you want to make sure you have compliant fees for service. We want to make sure in that previous slide that the propositions that you saw in the government code, that the fees that you are moving forward with or ultimately decide to move forward with are compliant. You want to make sure that it is a reasonable cost providing service. And what that kind of means is you want to make sure that the methodology that's followed, the data that is collected, is appropriate and accurate enough to make sure that the cost for providing services calculated is reasonable and falls within that estimated reasonable cost. And finally, cost recovery. Obviously, the goal is to not be dependent on the general fund and to make sure that you are recovering the costs for the services that you provide. to make sure that the division can continue to provide those services effectively and efficiently. So for this user fee study, cost recovery opportunities were looked at. Revenues implemented by the city council is the process we're looking at this moment. What we did not look at are any taxes, fines, development impact fees, utility rates, water rates. Anything of that nature is not governed by the same propositions or government code. Those were not addressed in this study. So there are two primary project elements, and the first is to understand the full cost of providing service. That is the process that the staff has gone through with me over the last roughly 14 months, 12 to 14 months. The next step will be to set municipal fees accordingly. Currently, we are right in between those steps, which is to bring this to council for your consideration and review, and ultimately the staff is looking for some guidance and some policy considerations before they come to you for fees to be adopted. So benefits of realigning your user fees or the user fee study that was conducted is to reduce general fund subsidy as much as possible, to realize revenue for services reduced or eliminated, and to fund departments efficiently, and to set realistic expectations for cost recovery. Item 4 on this list is the one that I would like to bring to the council's attention the most. One of the benefits of this study, in addition to realigning your fees to more appropriately cover the costs that are incurred by the city, is to understand anywhere where there is a decision to subsidize or a potential subsidy that may be on the plate, that you as a council are now more aware of what that subsidy looks like. So instead of just an information of the division is currently subsidizing multiple fees, you have dollar amounts that provide you with better information of what types of subsidies you are providing by the division as a whole and fee by fee. And that's a piece of information that I believe, regardless of the outcome of the adoption of the fees that go forward in the next couple of months, is a key piece of information as you go through your budget cycles of understanding what that subsidy looks like and having a better understanding of what those dollars really look like. So this slide kind of walks you through the process that the staff went through with me. First, we did a fee structure review. During the fee structure review, I spoke with the staff and we discussed what is working and what is not working in the current fee schedule. And what I mean by working is not only the way that certain fees are currently structured, is the calculation of those costs effective and efficient? Does the customer understand what they are being charged? Are there fees on there that are the way it's titled, the way it's tiered, the way it's structured is actually not allowing staff to properly cover or recover the costs that they are expending? Are there new fees that should be added? And are there fees that, for various reasons, such as the city does not provide this service any longer, it's a fee that is outdated for one reason or another, removing those fees as well. Next, we went through data collection, and this was various points of data. Especially, we started with the fiscal year 16-17 budget. So all the data that you are seeing in front of you is calculated based on budgeted expenditures and staffing for 16-17. Through that data collection, I'm able to define total cost, and I will go through this process in a moment of calculating a fully burdened hourly rate for the engineering division for fee-related activities. Then we went through an annual cost analysis, and what that looks like is talking about, and we used fiscal year 15-16 data to understand what types of permits and how much effort is going into the engineering division. So the reason we chose fiscal year 15-16 is that it was a closed year, a closed fiscal year when we started this study. Then we calculated a fully burned hourly rate. Then I calculate the per unit service cost, and this is where Mike was speaking to. He used the term time and motion study. I tend to use the term a cost for service, and that relates to calculating the fully burned hourly rate and then discussing with staff in multiple meetings what it takes to complete each permit type in hours. And then finally, cost recovery outcomes and fee setting policy, which is the step that is remained to be completed. Steps 1 through 6 have been completed. The fee model itself is finalized, meaning that all data has been collected. Staff has had an opportunity to review it multiple times and has agreed that the data that's been provided is most accurate and appropriate as possible. There are 3 specific types of fees, and you will see that the fee schedule for the engineering division houses all 3 types of fees. The first is your flat fees. Those are your over-the-counter fees. Those are your fees that tend to be similar every time, or the steps that it takes, the time that it takes tend to be very turnkey and similar. And so that those fees are usually set at a flat fee rate, so it's one cost, you pay it, and you're done. Your second is your variable fees based on project characteristics, and you will see that this is where some of the fees changed on the fee schedule from previous years to current. This is where you tier your fees based on square footage, linear foot, whatever the mechanism of measurement that makes most sense for that type of activity, grading permits, encroachment permits, things like that. The purpose of tiering that is so that the fees, you don't have one fee, so that you lose the ability to capture the full cost. And these fees, where you tier them, tend to be variable in their time and effort. So when you're smaller, a smaller project might be more uniform, and you're able to understand it better. But as they get larger, as you add more square footage, as you add more linear feet, whatever the mechanism is that you have to inspect, you want to make sure that you have a way to charge the appropriate cost that fits the type of project that is being permitted. And finally is your variable fees based on actual time tracked. I call these your deposit-based fees. So these are the fees where staff might say, there's no way for me to tell you what the average is or what the most common type of project or how much work goes into this type of project, because they vary so much, and they can go from 15 hours to 150 hours, and there's no way to predict that until you're in the project. When there are situations like this, we recommend a deposit-based fee. So what I do is I calculate the amount that hopefully is closest to the average of that type of project to reduce the number of times that you are either asking the customer for more money or having to provide refunds. So in the deposit-based fee section, that allows staff to collect a certain amount of money that will cover the basic beginning costs of that permitted activity, but gives them a mechanism to, again, continue to charge if that project goes from 80 hours to 150 hours and the customer has reached the deposit level. So now I'm going to go through very briefly how I calculated the fully burdened hourly rate that is associated with the fees that are being presented to you today. The first is to define total cost. In the user fee study, total cost consists of direct costs, which are your budgeted salaries and benefits and expenditures. That is straight from the city's budget. The second is your indirect costs. These are your program, division, and departmental and agency-wide indirect costs. What this means, this includes your citywide overhead. This also includes departmental overhead, so trainings, meetings, and breaks, supervisory, clerical, training activities. A portion of those have been included into the calculation of the fully burdened hourly rate. The purpose behind that and the thinking is that for the department to run as a whole, there are overhead costs that are incurred by the department to make sure that staff, for example, your inspectors, are trained properly to do the inspections that they are asked to do. So a portion of that cost was also included in the fully burdened hourly rate calculation. Then you have your support. For engineering division, normally if we do a full fee study or if we do multiple development departments, so if you do planning, building, engineering, once you have the key department done, you then, there is a lot of overlap in development departments. So a planning permit still gets looked at by engineering and gets looked at by building. And so we normally want to calculate those costs and include those costs as well. Because this was only a one division fee study, what we did do, and I believe it's included in your handout at the bottom of the back page, is calculate engineering's cost or time on planning permitted activities. How the city chooses to implement those or include those in planning permitted activities is, again, a policy discussion that the council will have with staff. But we did take that into consideration to make sure that the building and planning fees that were not studied still have an ability to collect the amount that the engineering division is expending on those activities. And finally is systems and maintenance. So there's ongoing and projected technology costs and maintenance, imaging costs. These would be costs that are not budgeted, so they're not in the direct costs, they're not on the budgeted expenditures, but they are direct costs, for example, a permitting tracking system, maybe iPads in the field for your inspectors to track and log all the activities and create their punch lists. Discussions were had with the staff of any of that type of technology or information that is not currently budgeted but that is projected and planned for the future, and making sure that that cost is included as well as appropriate. So once I've determined all the costs that go into the hourly rate, then I have to figure out how much time to put into the hourly rate. And what that is I did interviews with the staff. First, we outlined direct casework. This is fee-related activities. This is the intake and processing. These are your inspections. This is your permit issuance. Everything to project closeout. Then I determined the indirect services, which I mentioned previously, which is public information assistance and even code and policy procedure improvement. Where appropriate, a portion of that has been included when it is related to direct permitted activities. And finally is the support and overhead, which is that trainings, divisional admin, departmental admin, and support and indirect services. Again, staff went through multiple iterations of review with me to make sure that only the appropriate time was associated with the hourly rate. So once I have my direct casework, indirect services, overhead, I have all the costs that go into fee permitted related activities, and I know the number of hours that are available in a year. We use a year as how much time is available to do direct permitted services activities. I divide those hours into the available or the cost associated with it, and that gives me my fully burdened hourly rate for permitted activities. This is some information on the funding matrix that I have seen and NBS has seen throughout California of how councils tend to determine what should be funded by the general fund or subsidized versus what needs to be funded by direct services and permitted related activities. The question really is, where is there a global benefit and where is there an individual benefit? And overall, when there is more of a global benefit or a pure global benefit, for example, fire emergency response, street maintenance, those tend to be more tax funded, general fund funded, or funded by any other funding source that's appropriate. On the other spectrum is the individual fire sprinkler permits for specific buildings, new businesses, encroachment permits, which is on the fee schedule you see before you, engineering development reviews. Those are benefiting a specific individual or a specific entity, a business of some type, and that cost should be recovered and covered by that individual who is receiving that benefit. In between is a spectrum and a balance that you as council would know better than I do on maintaining that balance and where to make those decisions. But this is what we tend to see as you go through the policy setting discussions that you will have with staff of where there may be need for subsidy and what that policy or that consideration looks like. These are some of the fee study best management practices that we have seen over the years, and they are just recommendations of activities that if they are taken on by the city, they tend to find more cost recovery, more appropriate cost recovery, less reliance on the general fund, and in general, their fees and permitted activities are more in line with the activities and processes that are happening within each department. Specifically, a comprehensive fee study every 3 to 5 years is recommended. The reason it's recommended to do it on a regular cycle of some kind is because of the types of changes in your expenditures, general fund support, all of the things that happen, salary and staffing changes. They could be very dramatic. And if your fees are not looked at on a regular basis, you may find yourselves your fees are not charging at all close to what the actual cost is. We do recommend more frequent studies during organizational or economic change. Back in 2008-9, when we hit the economic downturn, that was a significant change. And as we had the upswing over the next several years, many of my clients had to do a fee study multiple times, meaning maybe once every couple years for multiple reasons. One of my clients, a fire department, a prevention department, had to get rid of all but 1.5 FTE in their department. So when the economy started getting better and they were seeing development, they did not have the staff available. And so they needed a fee study to help make sure that the fees are recovering the cost for the staff that will be doing the prevention work. Another example is if you solely contract out for certain activities or solely use it in-house, and all of a sudden that changes. So for example, if you're using an inspection company to do all of your inspections and all of a sudden you decide to bring that in-house, then there is a significant change in your budget structure, your staffing structure, your cost structure. And a fee study would help you to realign those fees to make sure you're covering those costs. In between a fee study, you can use an annual increase mechanism. And usually I do CPI or salaries and benefits. One thing to note, and this is going to be specific to this council, is you will see there are a few fees in here that there is a dramatic shift from the current fee being charged and the projected full estimated reasonable cost. For example, in your grading and encroachment permits, you're seeing from $200 to $1,200. That is quite a jump, and most councils I've seen not comfortable with making that kind of jump in 1 year. So you can use an annual increase mechanism, or this fee study is good for you for multiple years, so you could choose a tiered structure approach to increasing fees. So you could say, okay, well, 1,200 is where we need to get to. We're going to start with 10% increase, 15% increase, and it's going to look like this over the next 3, 4, 5 years. So outside of an annual increase mechanism, this fee study will help you wherever you choose not to go full cost recovery in the first year. It will help you to guide you what that looks like over the next couple years to get to that level. I always recommend a combined master fee schedule just because it's easier for the customer, especially in the development world, to know what they're going to end up paying in planning, building, engineering. That's just a best management practice. And then an established and documented cost recovery policy. So anywhere there is already a current cost recovery policy, that is great because it allows staff and council to follow that. What I believe is going to, and one of the positive benefits of them bringing this to you today and you having a chance to see the outcome and discuss what kind of policy you want to set as a council, is to set that policy now if there is not policy in place, if you choose to. But anywhere you can set policy for fee recovery, again, it helps you in those in-between years of how are we going to raise our fees? Do we need to raise our fees? Which fees do we choose to subsidize for the greater good? And this is my last slide before questions. This is a slide. These are a sample of the unfunded activities in the engineering division. What staff wanted me to relay to you in this is that many of these are permitted activities that this division only sees very rarely, maybe every 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And staff felt that they were uncomfortable to provide time estimates and a basic analysis of what it would take to complete those activities, because those activities tend to be larger in nature and also fewer and far between. The good news about those activities is that you do have a fully burdened hourly rate to go along with this study. So anywhere where there is not, you can set it as an hourly rate charge so that when those unique projects come up, you have an ability to collect full cost recovery. Some of the other activities on this slide, such as ENR updates, there really is not a customer to charge. So it is an unfunded activity because it is just the nature of the business of the engineering division. And then there's other activities that are such as city standard updates. Well, that's city initiated. So it's unfunded because it's initiated by the city and produced by the city and benefits, the city as a whole. So that's my presentation. I hope I didn't go through it too quickly, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the council? Know where to begin, huh?
Yeah, I think my list of questions probably would equal the amount of time you've offered so far.
Right, that's
Thank
what
you
I
very
told
much.
Mike.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that has impressed me the most is how comprehensive the process is that you've undertaken to give us a good picture. One of the things that you started to touch on at the very end is of concern to me. More from the standpoint that if we have now unfunded things that we're stacking alongside things we know we're not even capturing enough revenue for, how do we reasonably and intelligently begin to approach any kind of solution to that? But let me ask you a couple of questions up front before we get into that, or maybe that response is easy for you.
No, that's never an easy question.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I hit the nerve.
Yes, you did.
The challenge that I'm having is that is to take a look at the array of information and to come up with a net plus or minus adjustment to what we're currently doing. Yes, I know the reason we've gone through the study and the reason we're sitting here this evening is to gain better understanding. And one of the challenges that I'm having, frankly, is that, okay, we used to charge nothing, now we're charging $8,000. Okay. What has been replaced? What has been adjusted down? What has been adjusted up? Is there any way to develop easily a straw man or an example of what this schedule does in such a way that I can say, oh, it used to be this, but now it's that, such that we have a better handle on what we're actually trying to establish policy over?
So from the methodology perspective, a piece of information that might be helpful to you, and you would probably need to be walked through it just a little bit, is the full model, which the staff has. What we did to calculate what full cost recovery is, let's say, for a certain type of permit, is to take that volume from the last fiscal year and multiply it by what I'm saying is the full cost recovery and seeing what that looks like. What Mike and I discussed prior to the presentation tonight was that, and I will let Mike speak with you on which projects are the best, and I believe Rich had done this during this process, is to pick out some projects. So if council has, if they want to see an engineering, or excuse me, an encroachment permit and a grading permit, and provide a real life example of, okay, well, we had this project last year, this is what we charged, based on the new mechanisms, this is what it would look like today. And what I find is that tends to be one of the best ways for you to really understand, especially in those fees where you are seeing quite a shift in cost recovery. But I would leave it to staff to guide you on which projects that looks like or what projects, permitting activities they want to show you. But I think that's something that would be to your benefit to understand really what does this really look like in real numbers to our citizens.
Yeah, having worked with it for months,
Yes.
yeah, please understand that obviously I'm looking at the benefit that you've now derived and are offering
Right.
from a layman's perspective after having tried to digest what I could in the
Right.
last 5 or 10 minutes.
Right.
And so it's a little bit difficult to make that transition.
Absolutely.
Second question, much higher view, if you
Okay.
will. In their infinite wisdom, state legislature has levied against all municipalities a requirement for low-income housing, lower-income, affordable, whatever we want to call it. And it seems to me that whether it's infill, whether it's major project, housing project, whatever, that there's got to be some sort of understanding that we're going to make policy that's not going to price our community out of an opportunity for housing of any type.
Right.
And so I think we jump up a couple levels into the more political realm, which is unfortunately where we live. And the reality is, any offering as to how this does or doesn't or could or better not impact what we're currently doing? Should we adopt what we've seen here?
I don't have a specific response to the affordable housing piece, because I am definitely not in that world.
Well, that's
As-
more political response than I
Cor-
anticipated. So,
But one suggestion I do have, and your staff can do this, I won't say easily, because I know they're very busy.
Sure.
Something that we were not contracted for, but that I do is a fee survey, a fee comparison survey to the jurisdictions around you. I'm gonna caution you first and say that a fee comparison survey is never an apples to apples comparison. You could, unless it's for example, unless it's a city that I've done a fee study, I cannot tell you their methodology, type of housing, and call them and say, hey, what would you charge? What is your charge based on all this? I'm happy, MBS would be happy to do that, but I also believe that that's something that staff can do with their connections. And that, I think, would give you at least an idea of what's going on right around you, which is what I understand, and you would know better, what impacts you in the development world. So when a developer is coming to look and develop in this area, they've chosen a specific area. It's just a matter of what city's gonna fit their needs the most, right? So I think that might give you some information, at least in your surrounding area, of what you look like comparatively, which may help you make some policy decisions in that case.
and of course, we're just talking about housing.
Correct.
We start talking about business development and
Right.
entertainment development and so on and so on. We've got a full spectrum of those kinds of considerations.
Right, lots of spinning plates in the air.
I'm not at all concerned with the information and the study and the effort that you've expended. I'm really more
Thank you.
concerned now on the practical side of things.
Right.
What do we do with it now we got it?
Right. One of
thank
the
you.
activities I would like to let you know, staff is looking for guidance from you, and maybe that guidance can't be given today, and it's multiple conversations amongst council, is some policy setting decisions. Because the last step in the fee study that I will walk staff through is a recommended fee activity. So I've got full cost recovery and I've got current fee. But what does the recommended fee look like? What is that for each permit? If 200 is current and 1,200 is full cost, what does staff recommend based on their experience and their activities and knowing the community as they know it? They will go through that process, and that will project revenue in that category as well. And that is a step that is part of this fee study and will be completed once they've received whatever guidance that they require from you. We will go through that process. So you will also have that piece of information, at least to see what the picture looks like from what staff believes is the most appropriate recommendations based on your guidance.
Thank you for your fine work.
Thank you very much.
Any additional comments or questions from the council or the audience? Yeah, or a question for Director Pickoff, yes.
So, she spoke of having some sort of a gradual fee increase. Would it also helpful if you could provide something to show us what the priorities would be, where you could recover quickly and you're using the most resources? And if we could kind of tier that out and project as well when you show what cost for cost is, then that will give me a better idea of where we're looking at and how we're gonna.
So priorities as far as which fees we'd want to increase first?
Yes.
Because of the higher, staffing responsibilities and so forth, okay.
Which are necessary and which are just something you're kind of.
Yeah, really what it comes down to is on the grading and encroachment permit, what you see is we broke it up into tiers, whereas a minor permit to a major permit. What we found with the larger ones, like a Blue Diamond or a Valley Milk, is that when you looked at the grading costs and the encroachment permit costs and you put them together, what we actually charge them and what this program shows is very consistent. It's within thousands of dollars, just a few $1,000s. The biggest issue I saw when I looked at the numbers was on our smaller permits, our minor permits. There's every time a staff touches a project or touches an application for a permit, there are certain things that we have to do. It doesn't matter if it's a small project or it's a large project. We have to go through a litany of different things down to making sure they got the right security, they've got insurance. There's a myriad of things that we have to look for. So what I saw on the minor is that you can't absorb those costs and have a realistic number. You can't charge someone $1,200 for a sidewalk project to repair their sidewalk that the tree damaged. So those are the things I'm looking counsel from is we were charging $150. Now that's probably an unrealistic number as far as it's really low, but it might be the number that the council's that's you're comfortable with. But is there a number or is there something in between? Do you want staff to go back and take a look at the numbers and come up with a third column that says recommended, and bring that to you. I think it's a great idea to bring some examples, and I can bring those to you as well, so that we can, get a comfort with what we're trying to accomplish here. What we did with building is we brought you some examples on the building side. And again, one thing you gotta remember, these costs, okay, you have a subdivision, 100 units, 100 houses. When you take this cost, and you break it up onto 100 houses, it's a very small number. We're not talking the impact fees. So when you look at it from that point of view, we're talking about a small percentage of the cost of an overall cost of a house or of a project. So I'll bring that example as well, so you kind of see that a house, when I do a subdivision, this is what the fees would come in at for engineering, and it means adding $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 to a house instead of the $50,000 or $40,000 you're seeing in impact fees. Because I think sometimes that gets lost. What are we talking about here? Is it major increases in the cost of housing, or is it just a minor cost?
Great. Any additional questions or comments? Yes.
Just a little concerned as I work on this economic development that we're encouraging, businesses to grow a little bit, and then that's gonna actually cost them a lot more. You've heard the stories where people open up a business, they wanna just break out one wall, and that wall could cost, $1,000 to move or fix or something, and then the fees are 3 times that. I fear that. And so I just want to make sure everybody knows that's something that I want to make sure we're looking at it and seeing if the value of the fee is higher than the actual cost of the work. Yeah.
And we hear that already on the sidewalks and minor encroachment permit projects at its current level. So that's why when I looked at this, I thought, there's no way that we're gonna buy off, the council's gonna be able to say yes to this. It's undoable. So what we need to do is get a comfort level, do we wanna stay at these certain levels that we're currently at? Well, you can set those levels. And in essence, trying to improve the tripping hazards to the community, to improve the economic development impact. But by doing that, what we're gonna be then saying is you have to subsidize those costs. There's no way the engineering can be fully out of the general fund. So long as everyone understands that and we're okay with that, then, we can set the fees at a reasonable level to help facilitate development, to help facilitate trip and fall, fixing those. There's lots of things that we can do to support and hopefully develop this community. But we have to have some guidance from you and some policies by you so we feel comfortable, all together we can move forward with this.
All right. Additional questions? Yeah, round 2, or do you want to cede your time to, okay, here we go. Councilmember Scare first.
Just had a kind of question, comment. One of the things that I keep hearing from businessmen and residential is that on some of these permits, the inspector will come out and make an inspection, and then
Some pain from several years ago, because I think it applies. I'm trying to view it from the standpoint of a developer that walks into the office and says, this is what I'd like to do. Or a contractor, or a subcontractor, or whoever it is that needs to come into the office and stand at the counter. And I'd like to believe that we have moved away from any kind of practice whereby we've got, bear with me, we've got this fee from this schedule, and we've got a library fee, and we've got a list of such and such a fee, and we've got a county fee, and we've got a such and such and such and such fee, and then a school district fee. The pain that, as you may recall, I pointed out at the time was, do we have it segregated in such a way, because we are a full-service, one-stop shop for all of these fees, and do we have it now set up whereby we can say, these are the fees that are going out of the city, or at least out of our purview, and this is actually what we're talking about for you today here. We're collecting on these people's behalf. The ultimate wisdom in having them, let me just add this, is that we do retain control over how that the standards are being met, that they're actually going over there. We don't encounter further delays because they haven't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you may recall my concern that all of a sudden there's a perception that we're the most expensive people on the planet Earth. And I'd like for us to depart as far as we possibly can from that perception, because it is just a perception, it's not reality. It is fiction, not fact. Can you help me? Are we there yet? Have we
I'll start
segregated
from the
those?
very beginning of how we started dealing with that fact, and
Okay.
to where we are today.
Okay,
Early on, we used to get in a situation where someone would come to the building counter and say, what's my building permit cost gonna be? And they would give the plan check and inspection fee. Then the applicant would come in later and have all the impact fees added to it, and they're like, what's going on? So we instituted, and same thing, they come to engineering, they get engineering fees, but they wouldn't get building fees. So we about, it's gotta be about 6, 7 years, 8 years ago, we implemented a fee estimate process where we don't allow staff to give out a number without going through the process. And that process takes the impact fees, it takes the plan check and inspection fees, it puts it all together, it includes the county's fees, the school fees, includes everything, and we give an estimate. And that estimate then breaks that down and says, these are the building plan check inspection fees. It's usually a real small number, and this is the impact fees from the city, this is the impact fees from the county, and this is the impact fees from the school district. We break that out. The next step is we have to figure out how to provide a receipt that dials that in as well. And we haven't got there yet, but that's something that's on our radar to try to get done, so that when you take a receipt home, it will say X, Y, and Z. This is who it all went to. The problem is, there's still gonna be perception that I paid this much to the city of Turlock, but at least we can go through the process of trying to disseminate the information so that they understand that not all of it comes to us, or not all of it ends up staying with us.
and regrettably, the perception is with the majority of the population who never deals with going through the process.
That's right.
They just hear the rumor from the neighbor who's concerned about his experience. And so, but it just seems to me that we ought to be able to arrive at some point in time, whether it's a color-coded form, whether it's a pre-colored, sectioned off, blank stock that we run through, that stuff hits those particular colors or whatever. So if you look at it red, it's not here. You know, it's not, green is us here.
Right.
This is us.
And we want to put that receipt together, and we're trying to figure out how to do it through the New World process, so that when they pay it, it comes out that way. We're just not there yet, but it is something that we're trying to work on. And you know, it is a perception that the city costs so much because we are collecting that. The last thing I did want to point out, I'm not sure if the council is fully aware, but the school district asked that we not collect our fee anymore as of July 1. So at this point in time, you may hear from developers and builders, I had to go to the school district to pay that fee and then come to the city of Turlock. Why are we doing that? It was at their request.
Well, that's another whole issue. Thanks, Mike. I think it's beneficial to have a little bit of that history, because unfortunately, it's blended in with what we're seeing now, so.
So what I'm hearing here is probably one more workshop, that we bring some examples, we bring some, you know, what would a typical 100-unit subdivision look like in fees, and how would that, over what we're currently charging, how would that look like on a cost per house basis? That we'll look on some priorities and see like which ones, if we're gonna raise some sooner than later, we'll take a look at which ones we want to raise sooner or later. So we'll basically try to give you all the information, pretty much what we gave you for building. I don't want to give it all to you tonight because it's a lot to digest. So I think it's a good idea to just come back with one more workshop and trying to get a little bit more information. Do you want the staff to go through the process of making a recommendation column and going through that exercise before we return? Or do you just like to have the comparisons first?
My view is be very helpful.
Okay, bring it on.
But I think the other thing, to Councilmember Bublak's question, and to her point, it might be real helpful to understand the impact on a similar type of example,
Right.
whether it's a Hobby Lobby or it's a vintage lounge.
Yeah, we'll absolutely bring several different types and sizes so you can get a good feel for it. Because
Don't build a city, Mike.
No, I know. Well, I will give you 4 or 5 examples. I really want to give you an example like a Valley Milk, something that's more like a dentist's office or something, and then maybe you know, some housing, you know, numbers, so you gotta get a feel for it. The problem is every project is different. Every project is unique. I can give you an example here, and maybe not exactly what the next one down the street is. So.
Well, since we're talking philosophically, thank you.
Yes.
Mike, real quick, I believe you had said that TUSD is covering their own cost now, is that correct?
TUSD is collecting their own fees at this point in time, and
Okay.
what they do is they'll give us a embossed receipt to the applicant and said, take this to the city, and that'll guarantee that they will process application. So we don't issue a building permit until they actually hand that document to us.
So I know that one of the reasons it was all grouped into one was to make it one-stop stopping, but for the appearance of these are the fees that you're paying to the city, could we just have county do that too?
Well, right now there's an agreement that says the city of Turlock will collect it and will process it. We will have an opportunity to have some discussions with them, I think, next July, that possibly we could start talking about. We don't do that, but from a customer service standpoint, we've always done it because it's a lot easier for us to deal with it and have a customer come in and write one check. And we start pushing this off while it does, clear up what actually is going to the city, but it does also cause a little heartache to the applicant.
Any additional questions? Councilmember Jacob, any questions? Put him on the spot.
No, I don't have any questions.
All right, thank you. Well, we're going to be having another workshop. We appreciate you coming down.
Thank you very
to this.
much.
Perfect.
Have a great evening.
All right, with that, I will,
Move to adjourn?
there it is.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Councilmember Bublock, seconded by Councilmember Scare. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned, and we'll come back in about 8 minutes.